Bill, so lovely to have you here.
Nice to be here, Rainey.
Let's start with the problem or challenges first. I wanted to get your view about what you think is the root cause of human suffering or mental suffering.
I used to think of it as the problem being chronic mental stress because but now I see it back behind that. Some of the data has really been clear, whether it's Dr. Robert Sapolsky from Stanford and there's other researchers have shown that the response, our stress response in our body, which as we know is very powerful and can save lives, was meant for that reason, to save our lives or in our effort to save other people's lives. And it's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis gets thrown into motion in what we call the fight or flight or freeze response. And it appears that not only in our species but in other species, up to 30 minutes a day is no problem at all. It's healthy. You might have to, the zebra may have to escape from a hungry lion. A hungry lion may have to try to catch a zebra. And so 30 minutes a day of activating that stress response with massive amounts of cortisol, glucose, norepinephrine, epinephrine, hyperclotability, knocking out 40 to 70% the immune system, to face the life or death situations. The problem is that same and the inflammatory response, which is like a 5-stage SWAT team, and hyperclotability, because if the saber-toothed tiger gets you a swipe of you, you want to be able to stop the bleeding. The problem is that same system is activated with us worrying about our mom's breast cancer or our dad's alcoholism or our grandson's cocaine habit, or whether there's going to be a layoff or the pandemic or whatever. And I'm not saying it, if we don't understand that system, how it works, we innocently activate that system, and then we start having what I call alarms, loving alarms go off, Rainey. But to me, we get loving, what I used to just see as alarms with information. And then I saw, wait, they're love letters. They're loving alarms. And it comes a little bit to the solution if I understand that there's a totally benevolent, beneficent energy behind life, which I do, then what we call symptoms are seen from a whole new paradigm. They're seen as love letters. When a person, to go back to before I go to the love letters, I'd like to talk about ease, dis-ease, and disease. Just to kind of make it simple. It's arbitrary. Somewhat arbitrary, but not fully arbitrary. So what it shows that if we are not activating that stress response any more than 30 minutes a day, that's really that's healthy. But we also activate it with worry, guilt, resentment, unresolved grief, overanalysis, drivenness, some what I'll call thought habits, people using this power and gift of thought in a way that's not healthy. Now, what the research has shown in the last 10 years is that if we activate that stress response up to 3 hours a day, we will get symptoms, we will get signals, but we will be unlikely to cause major disease. We will get dis-ease, but there is neuroadaptive mechanisms within our body that up to 3 hours a day, even for prolonged periods of months, uh, oftentimes the body does not create full disease. The person experiences dis-ease in at least 4 places. And what's hereditary, it appears, is which alarm is most sensitive in any individual. For instance, I'm going to list them: mood, tension, body, thought, and body. So mine was most sensitive to mood. I went in and out of depression for 21 years. Now I was spending 6 to 9 hours a day in some form of upsetting, negative, stressful thinking, but I had no idea I thought it was from my genes and my heredity and my background and things that happened 30 years ago. I didn't know it was what I was doing right now. And so some people's, if you take anybody and you have them think stressful thinking 3 hours a day, all of them will have some degree of mood lowering. That's a gift. It's like you want your hand to hurt when you put it on a hot stove. So you can stop. Tension level goes up. People lose their feelings of serenity, and they may feel like, say, I just don't feel at ease. I feel tension. Their thinking, people's thinking goes from clarity to being muddled. I'm forgetting things. I'm missing appointments. I'm losing my keys. I'm wondering where my cell phone is. I'm going too fast, or my thinking's getting muddled. And the fourth thing is the body. The body experience is an interoceptive experience of our body. We start to feel dis-ease in our body. We either have some old injury that starts hurting again. Oftentimes it is discomfort or pain. And as you know, that's primarily through the microbiota changes that lowers the pain tolerance up to 70% with chronic mental stress. It goes to the microbiota, back to the hypothalamic pituitary axis, and literally lowers the response, the P substance response, that people respond to up to 70% lower substance of substance P. So, and sleep disturbance, one of the first things to go. People's lose their restful sleep. And the problem is that these are seen as, gee, I've got enough troubles in my life without having a headache and without having sleep disturbance and without having my mood go down. And instead of, wow, I'm being awakened to go to the presence, to allow my mind to quiet and to access something we'll talk about more, that there's some resources that nobody told me about in 26 and a half years of education and 41 years of living until April 1st, 1983. And so there's neuroadaptive changes that we can actually tolerate for months, it appears, up to 3 hours a day of stressful thinking. That's amazing. I mean, think of that. If 30 minutes is healthy, 3 hours, that's 600% neuroadaptation. That's 30 minutes versus 180 minutes.
People won't see this as a love letter until they obviously do, isn't it? Because like you
Right.
said, you put it very well that, people, these are like, you see them as love letters, but people are thinking the whole world is against them.
Right.
The people have been against them. They had trauma and everything, and now their own body is against them.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the system. If you don't understand how the system works, you misinterpret feedback from the system. Once we get past 3 hours, a man named Professor McEwen in 1998 coined a word in the stress research called the allostatic load. Fancy word, but what it means is that once you get over 3 hours a day on a consistent basis, you start to burden the adaptive responses in the body and in the psyche beyond their capability to maintain homeostasis, to maintain balance. So you start to get a what they call an allostatic load, a burden of physiological in real terms in the brain. You start knocking out neural circuits. You start increasing the rate of cell death in the hypothalamus. You literally, people talk about neurotransmitters and neural circuits, the connections between the brains. What literally people start to do innocently, please, I hear innocence. You know, we want to be able to take responsibility without burden, without blaming ourselves. I didn't know that my 6 to 9 hours a day of stressful thinking was creating intermittent severe depressions for 20 years that required me to see 6 different psychiatrists. But once I saw it, I could take responsibility without beating myself up, because we only see what we see when we see it. Right? We only see what we see when we see it. If you and I and Siraj are walking down the road and you happen to, at dusk or in a light fog, and you happen to see a windmill that we don't see, and you try to point to us, and we eventually, because you're a good pointer, we say, "Oh, Siraj says I see it," and I said, "Oh, I don't. Oh, no, I see it." We only see that windmill only exists in my experience after I see it. And that's the way life is. So what happens to me, very simply, we're at ease, and then if less than 30 minutes a day, and then we go to various levels of dis-ease, and then we go to disease, where you start the immune system gets dysregulated to where, as Dr. Sapolsky says, as best as that can be measured, chronic mental stress knocks out the immune system, or dysregulates it, damages it, if you will, from up to any measurements we have, up to 40 to 70%. That makes us more susceptible to cancers. It makes us more susceptible to viruses, i.e. the COVID. Makes us more susceptible to bacterial infections. The physiology that our body has every moment of our life has real implications. Allergies have gone up in the United States in the last 20 years. I think it's 3,000%, not 300%, 30-fold. That's the body's immune system mistakenly recognizing things as that aren't, because of the immune system dysfunction. Autoimmune diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, including lupus, including even diabetes, is an autoimmune disease. So, and again, this is tricky to talk about, because people go to you, say, you're blaming me. Well, I'm not. I didn't blame myself for my depression. I saw that I had a major role in it with my lack of understanding, because nobody had told me, right? So once we get over 3 hours a day, it appears that we start to get disease. We go from disease to disease, physical and psychological, psychiatric disease. The alarms, people have not responded to the alarms. And here's the deal. It's innocent, but if you and I, here's what happens if there is really a benign universal energy behind life, which again, I'm going to say, even as we talk about the problem, then the symptom is, if it is a love letter, if I try to dampen it over time, there's nothing wrong with damping it so the person can be calm enough to hear something new and get present. But if I keep damping it, the alarm is going to get louder and louder. The neuroadaptive, there was a wonderful article in the American Journal of Psychiatry And we've blamed it on the drug or the substance. If you drink alcohol for your anxiety, you will be able to drink enough to not be anxious. But then there's a rebound effect. And we used to blame it on the alcohol. I'd say it's on the system that the of life says, no, you need to hear this. That anxiety was an alarm, a loving alarm to get you to stop spending 8 to 10 hours a day in upsetting thinking and creating all this internal disease that you feel a need to respond to by drinking large amounts of alcohol. And eventually that rebound effect, the which people have thought was a rebound from the alcohol, but I say is just getting the alarm louder and louder in hope that somebody hears it so they save their life. It finally, people that drink alcohol and that use opioids get to where it almost takes what it takes to stop their anxiety and their internal distress, oftentimes puts them into not into coma or blackouts, or eventually sometimes actually into death, kills them, because they don't hear the messages. If you're in a movie theater watching a movie that you're really enjoying, and sadly, I think there are states here in the United States where you could bring an AR-15 into the movie theater, sadly. And let's say the fire alarm goes off, trying to tell people that there's a fire somewhere in the theater, and the person, I would not be good judgment to take their AR-15 and shoot out the fire alarm because it's bothering their enjoyment of the movie. You see what I'm saying? Because the fire alarm is trying to save their lives.
Yeah.
And sadly, without understanding of how the system works, what people do is often they get worried about the alarm, and they try desperately to get rid of the alarm when it's trying to wake them up. I went through life 41 years believing that things external to me that I had no control over determined whether I had a good day or not. And I know this will sound, it doesn't mean that I never get there, but when I get there, I know who did it. If I have emotional pain, emotional distress, I know, I don't believe it, I know that the only person that has the capability of doing that is in the same underpants I'm in. And the last I looked, there's only room for me. Now, that is tremendously relieving because I don't go looking for things external that I have no control over. It doesn't mean that I don't, when I see injustice, when I see wrong, that I don't do my best to do something about it. But the first thing I do before I do anything is to get my state of well-being back. Because in a state of well-being, we'll be talking about it more later, I have something with me that I'm going to call wisdom that I don't access very well when I'm upset or angry or fearful. You know, it's interesting, the amygdala, Dr. Sapolsky in his 700-page book, Behave, he talks about how the default setting in the human being, of the brain even, is trust. The default setting is trust. But we have been conditioned and our understanding, and the amygdala is often tied with anger and rage, but what it really is fear and anxiety is what is really but you can't have anger without fear. You can't have hatred without fear. The hatred is the response to the fear.
So Bill, one of the things that crossed my mind as I was preparing for this interview and asking questions is how much the rate of prescriptions for antidepressants have gone up in recent times, and more so than ever before. And in the UK, I was reading a report about how the rate have gone up by 6% between October to December 2020 compared to the same month in 2019. And so clearly, it's not just in the UK, I think it's also definitely in the US and other places. So the prescription rates for antidepressants are going up. But at the same time, you also see the incidence rates of depression and anxiety are also going up. It seems like despite having all those prescriptions, there's something else missing. And you did point to that. So I just wondered whether you wanted to say anything about why we are seeing an increase.
It's because of the present paradigm that people believe that, as I did for 41 years of my life, that stress is inevitable. It comes from life. It comes from the outside in. Even our term that this person has all these stressors. I hope someday people say we have these challenges. They talk about in the stress research that you gain stress resistance. Everybody talks about resilience, which means you get knocked down, but you get back up. But stress resistance means there's many things that used to bother you that don't even bother you at all anymore. I know many people with road rage that don't have that anymore. In fact, one person said, I'd say a little prayer for the people, hoping they get home safely and don't hurt themselves or other people. They didn't get more tolerant of dumb or whatever name they put on those people. They saw their innocence, that they were stressed out. The one person said, I saw that these people who I used to call SOBs in the United States, in a bad name, I saw that they were good people like me that were caught up in their thinking and not watching their driving. And so people start seeing the innocence in people and the lostness. Now, if you get lost enough, there's a fellow named Corey Keyes that I think we spoke around before that's did a lot of research for the positive psychology people. And he found with his little questionnaire, he put people into 3 categories. And again, obviously there's difference from the top third to the bottom third of the category. But the top category was thriving, 18%. As 8-year-olds, I think 88% are thriving. By the time they get to 18, as they get more caught up in their own personal thinking, it drops to 18%. 50% are okay but stressed. Say, I'm okay. As long as I do my mindfulness and my Tai Chi and my yoga and I run my 5 miles, they're okay but stressed. That was me for years. And then 32%, Rainey, in the United States, 30 across culture, across education, across finance, 32% meant languishing. They wake up every day overwhelmed by life. Those are the people a lot of times that you and I saw as clinical. We saw a lot of the lower half of the stressed but okay too, because they would go into depression, their anxiety, if they faced too many challenges. But think of that, 32% overwhelmed. Those are the people, the bottom part of that, I don't know the percentage is, the bottom part of that is waking up every day deciding whether or not to kill themselves. And sadly, then if they make the decision to kill themselves, they are deciding whether or not to kill others before they kill themselves. If you understand states, levels of consciousness, levels of understanding that we'll talk about more in the second part, levels of awareness, you're not surprised by things you read in the newspaper or from around the world. Because the level of consciousness generally right now is not very high. Now, is it higher than it was 2,000 years ago when 50,000 people used to come into the Roman Colosseum and watch animals rip to shreds human beings, or watch 2 gladiators fight to the death? Or even 200 years ago when there was practically nowhere that women could vote. Slavery was legal in the UK and the United States and Canada, in many, many countries. So have we moved? There's no country in the world where slavery is legal. It's not that there aren't people enslaved, and terrible thing that's the women trafficking and children, the sex trafficking. It's happening, but it's not legal anywhere in the world. So we are moving. Martin Luther King says the arc of moral justice is long, but it moves towards moral justice. And people like you and I would like to push that arc along a little bit if we can.
One final question.
Sure.
You said you suffered from depression for several years and you saw 6 different psychiatrists. What was helpful in the interactions and what was not so helpful?
Well, what was helpful was that these men and women cared. They were deeply caring people. You're gonna never find me hammering on psychiatrists. I would say that they need to see that this paradigm is a level of understanding that it's based on that's not healthy, and that they only see the answer as being medications or some organic deep stimulation of the brain or whatever. They don't see that what the human being has and how they can come to an understanding. But what was helpful was the fact that these people cared so deeply and kind of walked with me through my pain allowed me, I see now, to access resources that they didn't even know about, at least weren't able to point to me directly, but that allowed me to never have to get hospitalized, to never have to stop my education. I went through medical school, and I think about 28%, running at about 28%, because I was so stressed out in my head. And I wished I could have gone through medical school with about 94% of myself available? Yes. And I tried to make up with it with 50 years of continuing education and learning and reading. And so I think their caring was wonderful. But I sat on April 1st, 1983, and listened to a man named Sydney Banks. And within 30 minutes, a welder with a 9th grade education, and I hope people don't sign off, because I think there's whatever's behind life has a sense of humor. And I sat, and within 30 minutes, I knew that this man knew 1,000 times more about mental well-being than those psychiatrists and myself. And I felt a hope awakened that I had never had before in my life. That I could live a peaceful, joyful life, and that I could actually start to have an understanding that eventually I would get to where I knew I would be okay no matter what. No matter what.
I think this is a nice time to wrap up and end this conversation, because in the second section, I would like you to say more about what you heard and what you learned, but also to come to the solution as you see it for mental health. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time today, Bill, and I'll see you soon.
You're welcome.